Dr. Keys, like I said, his resume would be way too long. I'm going to give you some highlights, what I think are highlights. He has a PhD from Harvard in government studies, former presidential candidate. As you can see, I supported him. Probably the smartest man to ever run for president, in my humble opinion. He's ambassador to Zimbabwe. He was appointed by President Ronald Reagan as ambassador to the Economic and Social Council of the United Nations, served as Ronald Reagan's Assistant Secretary of State for International Organization Affairs. And the thing that's very timely right now is he was President Ronald Reagan's, and correct me if I'm wrong, chief negotiator and primary author of the Mexico City policy. I always heard Alan Keyes was the man who wrote it. And as I Googled information, I find chief negotiator, I find author, I find influence. So you can explain how you were involved, because I don't want to misquote anything. And then I have a few questions, but I'm going to let Dr. Keys, after I ask these quick questions, I'm going to let Dr. Keys open your eyes to what's happening with our country today and what the future looks like. So, Dr. Keys, was I correct about the Mexico City policy? That was the one fact I didn't know exactly.
Well, I was involved in the policy, but it was a policy that was formulated with the involvement of many folks, including Jeane Kirkpatrick, President Reagan, among others. I mainly was involved at the Mexico City Population Conference as part of the delegation there. I was one of the three main representatives, with Jim Buckley being the sort of designated head of the delegation. I was kind of his deputy, dealing mainly with the issues that had policy implications. And one of the things that is always necessary, especially when you're implementing policies that haven't necessarily been popular. And what we were doing to withdraw funding for the abortion activities of international organizations, you can obviously see that that's not going to be popular.
Exactly.
With the people who are gung-ho pro-abortion types and who believe, I think absurdly, that killing babies in the womb is healthcare. This has always struck me as kind of patently self-contradictory, but there you go. So when we implemented this policy and we're headed toward Mexico City, they had all kinds of articles that were basically along the lines we were going to be met with severe opposition when we got there, and other countries were going to be fighting us, and so forth and so on. And it turned out at that juncture that the opposite was true. In point of fact, the stand we were taking was supported by African countries, by Asian countries, by Middle Eastern countries who put a great deal of value on their offspring and consider the notion that you systematically destroy them to be something that's contrary to what is right and just. So I had been led by the news media, whom you should, as we have learned these days, never listen to when you want the truth, and was expecting a tough time, and found that instead we certainly met challenges, mostly coming from the leftist kind of European countries, right?
Okay.
But in other respects, putting together a coalition that's backed the policy, not only understood it, but as we're seeing now, Biden just made this change to end what they call the Mexico City policy and reintroduce the idea that we will provide funding for organizations that practice abortion. And guess what? I just noticed an article not long ago where they have already received complaints from countries in Africa.
Wow, that's very interesting.
Who say that this is going to then renew the pressure on them to change their policies, because they don't practice abortion. and the Planned Parenthood influenced UN organizations are going to then be in a position to browbeat them into submission,
Amazing.
to offer what the UN is defining as necessary health care. And of course, they claim that this must be the right of every woman and girl. Every woman and girl in the world must subscribe to the notion that it's right for them to come to the conclusion that this is, this is not for me. I've got to kill my child in the womb.
Wow.
And I think that once you ponder that, you realize we go from being a force that stands with people who are trying to maintain respect for God's will toward life. The country goes from being that kind of force to being a force that is trying to force people to do evil, basically, and to force governments that outlaw abortion and that don't pay for abortions to participate in this Holocaust around the world.
You summed that up better than anyone's I heard, and it's amazing. The mainstream media, you would not know there was any opposition to this if you listen to the mainstream media.